G'day viewers, got my new desk set up, so experimenting a little with some different angles and different settings. Not to mention, new toy has a remote control. I can act like I'm a big professional outfit with someone running the camera, zoom in while I'm talking. But enough frivolity. Here's a topic I decided to take a little seriously. After some of my recent videos that arguably talked about Australian culture, one of my subscribers, an American, asked me to fill in on what do Australians think about Americans. Now, there's a loaded question. Now, that's actually quite a good question, because one thing Australians and other non-Americans often think about Americans is they lack an awareness of how they're perceived by people in other countries. And as this particular guy, Leggett Terran, if I'm pronouncing that right, is joining the armed forces and will be seeing the world, as they say, he's interested to know what sort of reception he can get. Now, look, obviously, anything I say is not a universal truth. I'm going to be sort of averaging opinions. There are obviously extremes for everything, but in context of specifically Australians, what they think about Americans, you get the extremes on one end of the spectrum, like our Prime Minister, Mr. John Howard, George Bush's favourite world leader, because nobody sucks up to George Bush like John Howard does. John Howard still thinks George Bush has not done a thing wrong. And at the other end, you get people who just reflexively say they hate Americans for whatever reason. Maybe it's politics, maybe it's whatever. But those are the extremes, and they don't represent the majority. If we were to take a middle ground, here's the analogy I'd use. If you have a big brother, what do you think about that big brother? Maybe that big brother, okay, he's richer than you. Deep down you know he's cooler than you, but he's really overbearing. You think he's got your best interests at heart, but if you cross him, he'll smack you about. You always have to do things his way. It seems like if you're not agreeing with him, he'll smack you about until you do agree with him. Really? That's how Australians think about America. Overtly, they might think, that guy's a bit pushy. I wish that guy'd lighten up on me a bit. But deep down, they want to be like their big brother, whether they want to admit it or not. In my Australia Day videos, I did say I thought Australia was pretty much the best place on the planet to live. And I do think that. I visited America, got a few American friends who've moved out here. A few of the people I get on quite well with on the online world are Americans. Unsurprisingly, the internet's dominated by Americans. But, point being, from what I've seen, a balance of quality of life, cost, pollution, crime, all those sorts of things, I would much rather be living in Australia than America. But, as much as I like Australia, and as much as I'm getting pretty much everything I want, anyone who is being serious about pretty much any career has to admit that Australia is the Bush League. The real action is in America. The absolute top of the top in business, sport, films, music, anything really. The top of the pile in the English-speaking world is America. Personally, I'm quite happy with what I've got, so I don't feel that I need to go to America. Unless you're a Hollywood agent watching this. I will be there in a second, okay? So, what can you expect overseas if you are an American? Well, most of the time you're actually going to get a pretty fair deal. People will be willing to judge you on yourself. And honestly, someone who wants to leap to a conclusion and decide they can treat you in a particular way just because you're American, they're probably not worth your time anyway. And let's be honest, no matter how much you dislike George Bush, most Americans actually didn't vote for him. It sucks to be treated as if you're personally responsible for the actions of your government. Hell, I don't want to be blamed for things the Australian government does. But, okay, worst case scenario. If you're American, people might leap to an assumption. They might think you're arrogant, that you think you know best about everything, that you're ignorant about the workings of the rest of the world, and you don't care to learn anyway. That's the worst, and hopefully you won't get too much of the worst. Honestly, the best, you will get people who recognise that hey, maybe things are done in the name of America that aren't that fantastic, but at least the intentions lean to the good side of things. And particularly here in the South Pacific, you may well find yourself with quite a few fans of people who know their World War II history. Because basically, thank God, American economic interests coincided with wanting some level of control in this part of the world, or we'd all be speaking Japanese down here. In and of itself, that might not sound too bad, but read a little bit of your history. Ask someone Chinese about the rape of Nanking. Ask anyone in the Pacific Islands, the Philippines, New Guinea, Singapore. Ask someone who knows their World War II history about the Bataan Death March, Changi, the Burma Railway, okay? Things were getting pretty unpleasant here, and a large number of Americans died to stop the advancement of the Japanese Imperial Army. Also, a large number of Australian, New Zealand and British troops and various allies from the Pacific Islands as well. But in terms of what was important to the governments of the day, it was only the US government who thought it was important to stop Japan from taking over this part of the world. I believe a more or less direct quote from Winston Churchill when told the Australians wanted to pull troops out of the European theatre to come back to the Pacific because people were a little worried that Japan might invade and overtake Australia. Churchill's reputed to have said, "Let them take Australia. After we've dealt with Hitler, then we'll go and take it back." There may well be some validity to that, but the many thousands of Australians who would have died left to their own devices are probably really glad the Americans were a bit more pushy than Churchill. This has started to ramble more than a touch. I'm not sure how much of this I'll edit out. Keep it simple. What does the rest of the world think about Americans? Well, okay, I've said the bad. There's a stereotype of Americans being pushy, thinking they know everything while possibly not knowing that much at all, and wanting their own way and not listening to anyone else. The good side, people recognise, I guess, the strength and the positivity that most Americans carry with them. You meet people with an open mind, they'll treat you as an individual, and they'll be as interested to learn about you as you are to learn about them. If you happen to fit the stereotypes and you are a closed-minded, ignorant, self-centred bigot, well, you deserve what you get, whether you're American, German, Australian, whatever. Side note, I don't want to be famous in Australia. I do have Australian subscribers and I have Australians read my written blog, but I don't want to be famous in Australia because I won't make money out of it and I'll lose my job. I want to be famous in America because that's where the money is. And that's as good a way to wind up as any. America, for all its flaws, perceived and real, really is the land of opportunity.